Hey everybody, so welcome to the first episode of the Azure Lagoon series, where I am making the ultimate theme park / water park in Planet Coaster 2. So I recently picked up Planet Coaster 2 only a couple of days ago. I had played the first game pretty extensively, not to a very significant degree, but I really remember enjoying it a lot, and I really like the roller coaster mechanics. As someone who grew up playing Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and especially 2 as a child, I still love those games to this day, but I was really hoping for a more modern take on these games, and that's exactly what Planet Coaster 1 did for me. And so I know Planet Coaster 2 is not super new news or anything like that, but it's new to me because I never really had the opportunity to play it, because I remember when it first came out there was a lot of controversy. I won't really be getting into that too much again because I can't really bring a specific perspective to that, just because I didn't play the game when it first came out. So I'm not really sure what to contribute there, although I do think it is a little bit rough because I have read into it and learned more about it. Either way, here we are starting our Planet Coaster 2 world. So this is in free play or creative, whatever it's called. Right now I do have it on challenge mode, so all of the kind of management aspects of park design are still enabled for this park. And as you can see, I actually did keep it on the medium difficulty, which includes that you only start off with $100,000, and then I pretty quickly figured out that that was not going to be for me, because I ended up spending almost all of that money like instantaneously while building the first major area of the park, which is the parking area. And so I'm using a couple of pre-made assets from mods that other users have uploaded, and I was just absolutely so impressed by the detail and quality of these that I knew that if I tried to recreate any of these to my ability, it just wouldn't come out the way that I liked it. And so kind of the way I'm approaching my park design is I'm taking a lot of these elements from other creators and making them my own. So as you can see, I'm putting together two pieces of a parking lot, and then a parking entryway, like where you would pay to go for parking, and these don't overlap exactly, obviously, because they're not necessarily meant to. So I'm going in and being very specific in the way I approach this and relaying all of these different elements and assets. So here I'm going and painstakingly redirecting all of these arrows to turn this into a one-way rather than a two-way, because I knew that I wanted to have more parking than just this smaller lot. I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to implement that, but in a little bit I end up finding another parking lot that I end up Frankensteining to this one. So for now, before then, we're starting to populate the parking lot with some more realistic looking cars, which I think turned out really great. And it's gonna be, this introductory video in particular is going to be a little bit tedious and repetitive, just because there's gonna be a lot of very specific morphing of the ratio, like the sizing aspects, and positioning these cars very specifically onto the pavement, because if you could tell, this is not actually pathing that that customers can walk on. This is just a floor building put next to each other, and I ended up deciding to do this because it worked really well with the building assets that I was already using. So turning it into pathing would be a little bit difficult. I definitely could see why it would be great, because then you can actually have your customers walk throughout the parking lot, but later in the video you'll see that I ended up doing a sidewalk with actual pathing that would direct the customers to the actual park entryway. Okay, here we go with this dang parking garage. So this is the point at which I'm pretty satisfied with this original smaller entryway lot, and I'm ready to go ahead and expand to our next lot, or in this case I really loved this parking garage because it was pretty space saving. And I think it could look really interesting, but as you can see, this is just really not working out for me. It's not meshing well with what I already have, and the biggest problem is yet to be faced is that they designed this with pathing in mind, which is great, honestly, because then your guests can walk around the parking garage. Like, how cool is that? And I figured this out when I go to resize it, and the paths do not resize with things, and this was the first of many encounters with figuring out how resizing things works in Planet Coaster, because this is the first time that I've ever tried to do that. So I ended up deciding to go with this actually really cute and super well designed parking lot instead, and again it was designed with paths in mind, which again, super great, super awesome, just isn't gonna work with what we already have unless I wanted to restart. And I'm not gonna lie, I am really not good with pathing, and here we go again. Okay, the resizing didn't work, but we're just gonna stick with it this time. Flatten out that terrain so that everything looks really nice and shines through. And I especially really like this design too, because I kind of hate having to finagle with these road lines, and it already had like 90% of the ones I needed built in. We just kind of had to, like I was saying, Frankenstein these together. So a little bit of background too about what I've accomplished so far in Planet Coaster. So at the time of starting this park, I had about 7 hours put into the game, and I would say most of that was put into the campaign challenge Ashore thing, because I went ahead and did the tutorials, and those were pretty basic, went through those pretty quickly. A lot of those mechanics about ride placement and queue pathing are extremely similar to Planet Coaster 1 and very intuitive also. So I didn't have any problems with that. But honestly, this game is, I don't think people give it enough credit. It's actually really hard and very complex. And so there were a lot of things that when I started to do a Ashore thing that I really had to look up, especially when it came to the new pool mechanics, which I knew I was going to be super stoked for. I was so excited to design flumes and get some really neat pools going, and that's why I picked to do a Ashore thing. Well, one, because it was the next one in the series, and two, because it had that big emphasis on building like a resort theme park, which, as you could probably gather from what we've started so far about Azure Lagoon, is definitely what I'm going for. And so that's why I picked the tropical biome here, and I'm trying to go with a more tropical theme, which isn't super evident just by this first video by doing the parking lot, but as we get into the entryway, we'll definitely see that design shine a lot more through. Oh, and I totally forgot here that I definitely tried to make paths work here, and then I realized, like, oh, that is not going to work. And so I end up resorting to doing the technique, which I talked about previously, of duplicating these. These are actually plaster floors specifically. they didn't align up very perfectly with the previous blueprint that I had, but it ended up being fine. I ended up making a brand new blueprint and lowering it very slightly, so you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a difference between the height of the first one and the height of the second one, but honestly, it's really not a big difference, and it ends up working out fine. Okay, so here is where things are getting a little funky again. So I wanted to go ahead and elaborate on what I'm trying to accomplish here. And so this original design was meant to be like a two-way street situation where you can only enter and exit from certain ways, and I don't quite remember exactly how it was because at this point I've already like destroyed it essentially and rebuilt it again. But what I'm trying to accomplish is that it is a complete square filled with 3 or 4, I don't remember, rows of regular parking. There's handicap parking that you saw, and there's EV vehicle parking as well. The very end, I end up turning into the bus parking. So we have a little bit of like the bus pickup and drop off in the original smaller parking area, maybe for just like quick unload and load zones, but I wanted to have a little bit more of that bus parking to have more flow of the customers as well. So I end up taking that last row and turning it into that. And here I'm also going and changing all the arrows to make it two-way parking or two-way street design that completely surrounds the entire parking, except for the very end row. So the exit is going to be in the top left corner, and the entryway to the park is going to be in the bottom right corner. Alright guys, let me tell you, this has got to be one of the most tedious things I have done. Not even just in Planet Coaster, but just in a video game in general. Well, hopefully it's obvious by this point that I really appreciate a good detail of realism in my designs, but this was just kind of infuriating to put together. Because also this, like I was saying earlier, is my first look with the scaling tool. I hadn't quite used that yet when I was doing just a shore thing, and I'm also finding out that scaling some of these cars is not as easy as it should be, unfortunately. Like when I tried to scale the UPS or the FedEx truck, it wouldn't quite do what I wanted it to, and then it would just get broken, and it was very frustrating. So but the parking lot's gotta get filled one way or another, so that's what we're about to do. Okay, guys, I think I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel here. I think it just looks so fantastic with all the cars inside of it then, because it just feels so real and so lived in, and I absolutely love it. So I finally get to have the chance to get started on the sidewalks, and this is where I was talking about implementing actual paths so that the guests can walk on these. And there was this really gross line between the quote unquote fake pavement and the real pavement, and so I thought it'd be nice to duplicate the same um, shrubbery and trees that we were using for the parking lot lines. At this point, we are really getting down to the final details and just kind of going back over what I missed. It seems like at one point um those road lines got deleted or something. Oh well. Just kind of remaking those, making these arrows a little bit more consistent. And I know it's not perfect. I know there's a lot of things that could be improved with this design or that could be more realistic about this design. But honestly, I'm really happy with where it's at because at the end of the day, this is a completely non-functioning, completely aesthetic parking area for my guests that they can't use. So it really is just for me to add that extra level of wow, look at this when you enter the park and just see all the big cars, and the filled in lines of parking, and just know that you're about to be at a really good park. So I am super duper excited to get to the entrance in the next part, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, if you have any suggestions or comments, please let me know. So let's take a look at the finished product.